Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, sir.
Thanks everyone who came yesterday. It was just a joy. I didn't lift a finger for any of it because Graham and Caroline did a lot, but even they would say they didn't really do a lot either because just everybody wanted to pitch in. And it's just awesome to see that kind of event happen, which is so random whenever Graham gets involved. Is he here? Yeah, there he is. Yeah. I was just, the relationship and friendship that it takes to get that kind of assortment of people in the same room together in the Illawarra is a testimony to Graham's friendship with a lot of people, that he just calls them and says, hey, would you be willing to do this? And then they show up a few weeks later without him needing to organize them. They organize themselves in the corner, and it was really great. And I think for me, it's a joy to have it start here in fundraising for the new Initiatives of Peace. We have, I didn't even get to say it yesterday, but we have over 30 countries inviting us to do this. So it's like every dollar makes it possible for a new community to engage with this stuff. But I think we've got a good kickstart. I'll probably next week maybe have the online numbers of how much was given, but thanks again for everyone. And I've been given the role, I don't think that was intentional. Stephen's on a different schedule than Graham, but it all ended up on the same weekend that I talk on the last chapter of Ruth. And every week I've listened to, everyone kind of ends up talking about the whole book because it's really hard to itemize each chapter without knowing the story. So I think we've gone through the book a few times, and I'm the only one, I think, with the right to go through the whole book because I'm at the end. But I had my thoughts, I had my whole thing listed of what I think I'm going to pull out of what I find interesting and maybe helpful to us. But I had this terrifying thought this morning. I was like, if I ever meet Ruth, in heaven or wherever, is she gonna think this is a total crap sermon? And like, what are you doing with my life? Because it's not a joke. Like this life that she lived is pretty horrifying. It just happens to have a happy ending. But I don't know. It made me think about my grandmother because she was a single mother in the 50s. And she ended up having to do whatever it took to raise her two children, and my mom and my aunt. And it's not a laughing matter, It's not like, let's just, one, most people don't even know her name. It's not like she got a book in the Bible. But also, it's just not a very glorious journey for a widow or a divorced woman or just any single mother. The book kind of glances over a lot of those aspects very quickly. One, that all these husbands died is almost a death sentence, and because we're talking 3,000 years ago, not just 70 years ago when my grandmother went through this stuff. But and amongst the death sentence, the actions that are being described are so meaningful because of the risk attached to them. There's no guarantee that her loyalty and love would produce anything other than two people dying together. And the other aspect I was thinking of was the layers of who she was and how everyone reading this story at that time would have read the first 3 chapters with like horror, because she is so not someone they would expect to be approved by God, and so not genuinely not the people of God. She's not an Israelite. She's actually the people that they're absolutely against, and for her to be found to be someone acceptable and brought into the lineage of King David and into the lineage of Jesus is just unspeakably profound. But it's a hard book to speak about too, and for me, because I think a lot of it unpacks a lot of the horrible world it was back then of women are just possessions and just something to own with land you know? And so I find it an interesting book to have to put a sermon together on. Obviously, we love it because of the happy ending. If it didn't end there, if she was just unbelievably loyal and that died a horrible death, then you'd go, well, it wouldn't. I don't think we'd be opening that book. It'd be like the Book of Lamentations, which we don't open. When was the last time anyone opened Lamentations? It's just kind of like skipped right over, let's get to the New Testament. But Ruth isn't that story, and I think it's very much written to, it's one of the few stories where women are the main characters, and women are the ones making the actions that actually produce the change. Even Boaz is kind of written in as like responding to the women's unbelievable love and great faith, and not, he's not by any means a main character. And that's just really profound for 3,000 years ago, to have a book written like that in a world like that. It's hard to imagine how controversial that would have been. But one way I wanted to unpack the book, I will say that chapter 4 is where the outworking of the whole story happens. It's kind of like after all the main decisions are made, now Boaz just follows through on what he said. And he sits at the city gate. He gathers the elders around so that it's a legally witnessed event, talks with the one guy that he needs to deal with because he's the closer relationship and he has the right to marry her and have the land. He does this little interesting conversation to go, well, do you want this land? That's, I think, to get him to show up. But then he says, oh, but you have to marry her, the Moabite, the woman you don't want. And she gets to keep the land, and her sons continue the family name. So basically he gets nothing out of it other than probably more drama in his family. So he declines, Boaz marries her, they have a kid. It's interesting, the women of the community are the ones who name the child. Usually it's the father who names the child, as far as I understand. But it is actually the women in the community who have journeyed with Naomi and Ruth for all that time. They celebrate and they name him Obed. But then they say that Ruth was better than 7 sons to Naomi, which is the most ridiculous thing. If you said that in the Middle East right now, like, it's the same culture still. It's the most absurd thing that a daughter, or not even a daughter-in-law would be better than 7 sons. 7 sons is like the dream of those cultures of having ongoing inheritance and wealth and all this and honor. And she's given that title, which again is so absurd of a statement. But that's how it all ends. And then it shows that she's the great-grandmother of King David, which is a pretty important detail of why this ends up in the Bible. So I wanted to unpack a particular word. I've done this before with you guys, but if you don't understand this word, I don't think you really will understand the book of Ruth or the Bible. It's a Hebrew word that is the center of what God describes himself as. It's in the middle of when he tells Moses on the mountain, Moses says, show me your glory, and then finally God, after thousands of years of not revealing his name or anything about who he is, he gets to speak. It's kind of important when God says, this is who I am. It's like more important than all the other people who say who God is. And he starts out, the very first thing he says is, does anyone know?
Well, I do, but I won't spoil it.
What? Oh, you know. Yeah, you know. You don't want to spoil it.
No.
I'm literally asking you to spoil it.
You want me to spoil it?
What?
He said.
No.
No.
No, the first thing he says is, I am compassionate. Which is fascinating, because you would think of like all the almighty gods in the world. You know, there's Zeus and Sheba and all around the world they have the almighty gods that are, what's the first thing they want to do? They want to like flex their muscles and say, I'm the only one and I'm the best, and throw lightning bolts and all this. But instead God says, I'm compassionate. It's his first description of himself. And then gracious, slow to anger. And then it moves on to say, abounding in this word, which we translate as love, but it really doesn't quite translate to English. It's the word hesed, abounding in hesed. And I maintain hesed to 1,000 generations, which I always find interesting because I grew up in all the end time stuff in the 90s. That was like, everyone was writing books about why Jesus was coming back tomorrow. I just always find it interesting that it's only been 200 generations since Moses. So, and his first thing he says, I'll maintain hesed to 1,000 generations. I'm like, I don't know, I'm not trying to make a point there, but it's a long time is what I'm trying to say. And it really is important to God. It doesn't dwindle over 1,000 years. It stays exactly the same. He maintains it all the way. His love doesn't disappear or dissipate. And the problem we have with translating this word into English is, this is all the English translations. Can you see why Bible translators might struggle to fit this into a sentence? And they really do struggle. They made up, one Bible translator created the word loving kindness, which we kind of know that word. That's because the Bible translator was trying to figure out how to translate this word, and that was the closest he could come to, but it is an unbelievably rich word. It's more than just love. It's like covenantal faithfulness, friendship. It's unending love. It's a bedrock. It's extravagant generosity, on and on and on. It's used 250 times in the Bible. And when God repeats himself in the Bible, that's like the volume switch because they didn't have volume on books. So he repeats himself, and he repeats it in his one time of telling Moses on top of the mountain. He uses the word twice, right in the center. This is who I am. I am this abounding, unending love. And so usually we would see it translated as death past love. Actually, we just had Tanya just had a scripture up there. It said, praise the Lord for his unfailing love. It's not his unfailing love. In the Hebrew, it's actually hesed. Every time you see two words together, it's almost always hesed. But they had to pick two words. We praise God for his hesed, his unending love. And these are the common things, but this is a definition that is the closest thing we can get to a definition of hesed, is when a person from whom I have a right to expect nothing gives me everything. So I put this another way, show the next slide. Hesed occurs exactly where obligation ends. It's going beyond what's needed, what's necessary. It's this moment of extravagance beyond. And if we understand this word is the center of everything God is, and every time God presents himself in the Bible, it's a moment when nobody deserved it. It's a moment when it's so obviously beyond what the law requires or different things. Then you go, oh, that's where God arrives. And in this book, this is what really clearly shown, because you'll see in Ruth 1:8, then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal hesed with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. I think this says a lot about Naomi's state of mind. She put the dead before herself. She's like really not doing well at this point. But she's acknowledging that Ruth and the other daughter-in-law did something way beyond what they were obligated to do, to offer. Because she's basically, I would think that she didn't expect to make it back to Israel. I don't know any time in the Middle East in the last 3,000 years that a woman can just peacefully walk that far alone without trouble. You know, unfortunately, I think that's been true since their time. And here Naomi's going, no, just leave me alone. I'm just gonna go back. I think she's just planning to die. It's pretty much a death walk. And they know it, and that's why they're offering, no. And they're weeping. It says they wept twice together. They just were weeping together, going, no, because they know she's gonna die if she just starts walking. And the one, she releases them by this, but she mentions that hesed, like she's like so moved by their hesed, this extravagance beyond any expected obligation. And she sends them back, but then Ruth says, no, I'm actually going with you, even if we die, let's die together on the road. This is kind of where it's going. And that's the first mention of Hesed. And it's interesting at the next one, how Ruth is Naomi's a little bit different. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose Hesed has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers. So this is at the mention of Boaz treating Ruth well, because basically all Boaz was required to do by the law, and everyone else is in the law. I think that's what we think, everyone else is evil and wrong in this story. They're actually doing what they're required to do. And all he was required to do was leave the outskirts of his field available for any widows or anyone to pick, and they can get their food that way. But what he does is he welcomes her into the best harvesting, protects her from the other people, and lets her eat with them. It's just an abundantly more than what was required. The law, he would have been fine by the law to just let her pick on the outskirts of a field, but instead he really abundantly showed favor. And you can tell, like, she's been suffering because she was delighted when she brought back one basket full of wheat. That was the sign that, whoa, this guy is really being generous. I'm like, one basket full? She's working all day. I'm sure these aren't like 8-hour days. This is 12 hours. And she's just amazed she got one basket. Think about, this is after at least, I think it says at least 6 months of her working fields every day without any break. She got one day with one basket full. So I'm guessing these ladies are not, they're looking pretty frail after 6 months of eating whatever they can pound out of I don't know how big a basket is, but I know it's not a lot. But it's this where she says the living and the dead. She's kind of, it seems like Naomi's in a little bit more positive of a state than she was last time, where she said the dead and me. Now she's saying the living and the dead. She seems to be a little more positive after 2 acts of Hesed towards her. She's starting to rise. And then Ruth 3, and he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last Hesed greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And that's saying a lot, because she really put her whole life on the line on the first Hesed, the first extravagant gift to Naomi. But the context of this is that Ruth has no obligation to do any more for Naomi. Like, she's already done everything beyond what we would expect. And she could genuinely try to marry a lot of other guys. The reason Ruth goes towards Boaz is for Naomi. Because it's like so clear. It's not that it's not for herself or her own thing. It's for her husbands who have passed and for Naomi to have a future of a name, and their family line can go on. And he recognizes this, that you've only done this for Naomi again. Because this is not the easiest way, she could probably find other options of things that would be a better way forward, but she again gives away the rest of her life to marry this man so that Naomi could have redemption of her family. It's not even Ruth's family, it's Naomi's family that's being redeemed. The kinsman redeemer is not for the Moabite woman who lost her husband. So again, it's like Ruth is just this extravagant example. And what's interesting is that Boaz might have a soft spot for this, because his great grandmother is Rahab, the prostitute who does great Hesed for these Israelite spies and saves their life, and then she has her whole family saved. And both Ruth and Rahab are put into Matthew's genealogy for Jesus. They both get inclusions, and they're both not Israelite women. And it's this that makes them included, is their extravagant love beyond what's required. So that's a little bit of my unpacking. The last chapter is the outworking, so it doesn't say the word hesed, but instead says that this is obviously God that did this, which is interesting because there's no mention of God in the whole book, of God intervening or anything, but it's implying that when people live extravagant love without any measure, God moves through that, not just through miraculous power, but he moves through this kind of unbelievable love. And the other thing that was interesting to me was that I didn't realize there's 3 different takes on when this book was written. The traditional view is that it was written in Samuel's time, which means it was written while pretty much contemporary with Ruth. But then the next most popular view is that it was written just in the time of David and Solomon, when there was arguments about who is the rightful next king. This would have come up, why is there a Moabite woman in your genealogy? And so they needed to write a book that gave legitimacy to David and to Solomon. So anyways, but I didn't realize the most common view now of this book is actually it was written after exile. So probably another 500 years after Ruth. And it was actually written as a protest literature against Ezra and Nehemiah. Which sounds interesting. We don't think of the Bible being written in protest of itself. But there was a strong push in Ezra and Nehemiah for all the men to divorce all their wives that were not Israelite wives. There was a real strong thing. We need to purify our genealogy. We need to purify the land. We need to divorce all these women. And most biblical scholars say that this was written in that time to say, whoa, 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 before you go divorcing all these women and leaving them as widows all over the land, what about King David? How can you justify ditching these women on the basis of Ruth? What makes someone a true person of God? Is it your bloodline, or is it your heart? Is it your character? And Ruth clearly gets embraced into the bloodline of King David and Jesus, not by her blood, but by her character. And so I found that interesting. I don't know if anyone knew that before, but I found it really fascinating. It's whoa, 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 before you go telling people to throw these women aside. And, you can imagine the devastation that would cause. Ruth is a call back to go, what's this actually about? What does it mean to actually be Israel? It means to be people of Hesed, not to be just a bloodline, which we know Jesus talks a little bit about, because he's calling them back to the true children of God, the true people of God, and he says, God can make sons of Abraham out of these rocks. Who cares about what bloodline you have? It's how do you live your life? That's going to be the marker of whether you are a child of God. And I just thought my last reflection for us to think about is Ruth really reminded me of the women at the cross. It's interesting, Matthew mentions 4 women in Jesus' genealogy to start his book, and he ends his book with 4 women at the cross. And to show up at the cross is so ridiculously more than obligation. They were not obligated to be there. And then he dies. They take care of the body, which is, I don't need to describe it to you, but it's not very nice work to do. It's an extreme act of love beyond, because he's not their family. They just abundantly loved him, and then they took him and they buried him. And on, it's so extravagantly beyond. And it's interesting, the women in the genealogy are Rahab, the prostitute, Canaanite woman. You have Ruth, who's also a Moabite woman. And then Bathsheba, the woman that was only brought into the genealogy by killing her husband and, or well, cheating and then adultery and then murder. And this Matthew is like proclaiming at the beginning of his gospel that all these people who you think are unacceptable, they're sinners, they are women, they are from the Gentiles, every one of them, this is good news for them. I'm announcing a good news for all these people that have been kept out of the people of God. And I think the marker of it is on this hesed of going beyond the law in love is always the marker of the people of God. That they fulfilled the law by going beyond it, not by just doing enough. You know what I mean? Jesus obviously lives this in many ways, in the way that he seemed to break the law that the Pharisees were holding so tightly to, but was fulfilling the law at a much deeper level, because the real purpose of the law was to look after widows and orphans. Ruth shows that. Who's really fulfilling the laws, though? It's not the one who just has a bit on the scraps around their field, it's the one who actually sacrifices for the other and looks after. Ruth did that for Naomi, unbelievably, because she was too old to work, so she was only kept alive by Ruth working. But then Boaz as well does it without any real gain on his own part, because everything that comes from that marriage would end up in Naomi's family's line. He doesn't get the land, he doesn't get anything out of it. It's just a total gift of redemption. And so it brings me to the last thing. This is the only time Jesus ever tells anyone to go away and think about something, and I kind of want to do that with you, because I think this is worth going away and thinking about beyond this message. It says, go and learn what this means. I desire hesed, not sacrifice. And I always think about that because I'm like, wow, this is the only time Jesus goes, this is worth a bit more thought. Go away and think about this. And he says it in the midst of, what was the story in Matthew 9? I forgot. There was someone who's being rejected, and he then quotes this to say, this is the more true fulfillment of the law than what you're trying to do. But I love this. This is quoting Hosea, which is a whole book on Hesed. The name Hosea comes from the word Hesed, and it's about this woman. He marries a prostitute. She leaves him. He still stays faithful over and over and over, ridiculously beyond any obligation he has. And Jesus says, that's what I want you guys to look at, this is what I'm actually after, is hesed, not sacrifice, which brings me to communion. I used to think that communion, or just the death of Christ, was just to even the scales, like to just pay back whatever needed to be paid back. Even the word reconciliation isn't really a good word because it's just an accounting term. It means you brought all the numbers back to even. But that's not what Jesus did. And his sacrifice was not just like balancing the scales. It was infinitely beyond what he needed to give. It was so ridiculous, it broke the universe of understanding, of being able to balance. God desires hesed, the abundant beyond what anything deserved. He's not actually interested in the sacrifices. He's very clear about that. I desire hesed, not sacrifice. And so when we take communion today, I want us to be thinking about that this is not just enough to get me through to this week, or it's not just enough to cover. It's actually a meal of abundantly more than we could have imagined or ever asked for or ever deserved. And what does that mean for my life? Can I be a part of what God desires this week? In taking this bread and this blood, will I be willing to pour mine out and break my body for others this week? For no reason. Not for a great cause, but like just because this is who God is this abundant love beyond anything deserved or imagined. Will we honor his death through our lives into this next week. So I'm going to pray as we step into communion. God, I pray that you would move among us to be seeing Ruth as a real example of way beyond the law, beyond obligation, unspeakable love poured out. And as we remember you, Jesus, may we remember that you did the same and continue to do the same. You are our Redeemer, but you didn't have to. And I pray as we take communion, Lord, that you would meet us and guide us to be more and more like Hesed in our families, in our workplace, and in our communities. In Jesus' name, amen.